Howdy guys. Looks like we had another group join up in our little RPG escapade we've been having lately. I feel really lucky actually. My 10-year-old son decided to take upon himself to have his first tabletop RPG experience, along with my wife. She'd played before, but it had been quite a while. So they rolled up a thief, my wife, named Corelli, and my son went with his usual name for any character or video game, Katak, the fighter. They started out together knowing each other in the small town of Solon, a little farming community in the southern part of our nation, and they'd heard that there was great riches and fame to be gathered from the capital of Haven. And so they decided to set out, and after some deliberation decided to take the northern route, because in the backstory to this campaign there had been a great battle, the Battle of blah blah blah, now known as the Battle of Greymore, to the south with some dragons. So there was some fear that maybe there could be some danger from dragons to the south, so they decided to go north, which would lead them through the city of Daggerfell, across the Great River, and eventually into Haven. So they make out, and again, it's my son's first experience with any sort of tabletop, so I was going to try to just kind of let him get a feel for the rules and the mechanics of gameplay. And again, we're running Labrynth Lords Basic Edition, so I figured it'd be simple enough for him to, kind of wrap his mind around some of the different intricacies of gaming. And so they set out, and they set camp the first night, and all goes well. The next morning they encounter a group of bandits. And now Corelli, the thief, decides to stand back and use her ranged attacks. She kind of had a low strength score, so she was a little, I wouldn't say fearful, but maybe a little tentative to use her melee. She had a much higher dexterity bonus anyway, so it made sense. So she sits back and starts pelting these bandits with a crossbow. Meanwhile, Katak decides to charge into battle. He quickly dispatches one of the bandits, and then shortly after, they both take down the second one. My son made a disastrous starting gold roll. He had barely had enough money to start out with any armor and a weapon whatsoever. So he go ahead and he scrounges these bodies for the 2 short swords they'd had, and he takes them. So no problem, sure. So they continue on, and the next night they set camp, and this time Corelli has decided to take first watch, and she makes a hear noises check, and again she's a thief, and notices the sound of something shambling off in the distance. And she comes across this zombie dragging a 2-handed sword, and it doesn't look like it's noticed her, and it's not even moving directly towards them. It just seems like it's going to be moving on a course that would put them across their path, not necessarily in their way. So I kind of thought they would attack, but they didn't. They decided that it'd be smart to avoid combat in their low level and whatnot. I can understand that. So they decide to go back to camp and just kind of keep it quiet. Eventually they fall asleep, and they may wake up the next morning to the zombie just sitting at their campfire. And they say, well, that's fine. We were going to avoid combat, but enough's enough. So they decide to attack. And they quickly dispatch it. I mean, it's one zombie. Come on, no problem. And my son mentions that he wants to take this zombie's sword. I said, well, of course, no problem. It's there, and there's no other loot. Help yourself. Figured maybe he was building up to sell, to try. So after dispatching the zombie, the fighter and the thief, Katak and Corelli, decide to continue on to Daggerfell, where they do a little bit of shopping. I think Katak bought himself a short bow and some arrows, and they just go to the tavern to kind of recoup, to continue on to the next leg of their adventure. And this is where we'd called it a night, actually. We picked back up a couple of nights later. 2 of my wife's co-workers who had gamed before wanted to join in on the fun. So they rolled up a couple characters. I think we rolled up a cleric and a halfling. I was real excited to have a halfling in the group. It seems to be one of the undersung races and classes out there. I never seem to see enough of the smaller races. And everyone wants to play a dwarf, no one wants to play a halfling. And so they'd known each other, and the cleric and the halfling had not Carilli and Katak. And so they meet up in the tavern, and they overhear the thief and the fighter talking about heading on to Haven for fame and fortune. And inside the tavern, there's a notice posted that there have been several trade caravans gone missing over the last couple weeks, and that there was a reward for their location and potentially to end whatever was causing them to disappear. And as the cleric and the halfling overhear Katak and Carilli talking about taking on this mission, they decide, well, maybe it'd be wise to join up with them and make an even more formidable force. So they did a little bit of in-playing there, where they discussed what they wanted to do and if they would join forces and finish up their shopping and their dinner and move on. And they set out. And we're back, some technical difficulties. So they decide to set off, and on their first night they encounter a group of 6 skeletons. And Carilli had taken that watch and actually successfully moved silently and snuck up on them and then returned back to camp to wake everyone and warn them. And battle ensues. It's a very, very excitable group, to say the least, and they charge in, weapons in hand, and dispatch these skeletons. And I'm thinking to myself, I've got a cleric, and he's just pummeling these skeletons to death without any second thought to turn undead. And I was like, okay, no problem. So I tell my cleric, make a wisdom check. Every turn, I keep telling him, make a wisdom check. And he keeps failing, and it's just unfortunate, poor guy. And then he finally succeeds after there's maybe 2 left. He says, you suddenly remember you have the ability to turn undead. And we had a good laugh about that. And, well, the battle continued. They, of course, were successful. So they move on, and the next day, as they're approaching the bridge between, on the way to Haven, there's one main river that runs through the continent. And they encounter this group of 4 orcs that appear to be carrying something in the distance. And again, the thief, Carilli, decides to try to sneak up on them and get more intel. And it miserably fails. Her move silently roll. About 10 feet away from where she started, all 4 of them look up and notice them and come charging. So they fall into a really good marching order, actually. I really appreciated the strategic planning of this group. It seemed like they really had in their head that they want to defend the less armored thief and also protect their healer. So the halfling and the fighter are out front. And they dispatch these orcs. Little trouble. It was a good basic fight. And then, of course, they do find great interest in that these orcs were carrying something. So they search off where they'd started, and they come across a small parcel of loot. I'd actually gone straight off of the small hoard rule for Labrynth Lord in the back of the book and rolled up a pretty small reward for this group of orcs. And they find a sword and I think some gold and a potion. And they decide to not use any of these items until they have them identified, which is just unfortunate. They're taking all the fun out of being a DM. I could have made some horrible curse, something befallen them, and run. But no, of course not. They just put it away and we'll deal with it when it's safe. But so that's fine. And they make camp for the night. And as they awake, they hear the sound of a trade caravan that had passed them. And it strikes a chord, since they're searching for missing trade caravans, that they would try to figure out where these were heading or whatnot. So, but they've fallen behind. So they follow the caravan and eventually come over a hill to find the caravan is in shambles. You know, the cart's overturned, the horses are dead. There's blood strewn everywhere, no valuables to be found. And they make checks to see if they can try to figure out what had happened here. And they do find a good set of smaller footprints leading off south to what looks like an old goat trail or something. Well, they follow this trail and successfully are making checks to make sure they don't get lost in the woods. And they do eventually come across what looks like some sort of encampment or an old ruin with a large stone entrance and 5 goblins standing guard out front around a campfire, pretty much just talking and making dinner. They deliberate for a while as to whether or not they're going to just attack or whatnot. The halfling actually makes a flanking maneuver and successfully makes his roll to hide in the wilderness, because halflings have that ability. And makes a flanking maneuver and he's hiding out behind them, while our thief has taken the additional language of goblin. So she attempts to, after a long deliberation of how they're going to attack this group, and then occasionally, while they're talking, I'm making rolls. I wanted to pretty much move it along, so making rolls to see if, as a percentile chance as to whether or not the goblins would overhear them and come to attack on their own. And I was rolling horribly. They failed. They didn't hear a thing. They're just stupid goblins. And so eventually, Corelli decides to just come up and talk to them, and try to figure out what they're doing, what's going on, if they were indeed the party that had been attacking these people. And of course, instantly, the second she gets out one word, they attack, because they're just stupid goblins. And they're quickly dispatched, especially with the halfling hiding in the bushes behind them. And then they make it down into the first level of this encampment, which is like some sort of old barracks that had been taken up by these goblins. And in the first level of the entrance, they find a hallway with a door on the left and a door on the right, stairway at the end. And they enter the one on the left quietly and actually send the thief in very silently to find 3 goblins sleeping in beds. And she attempts to do a coup de grace. Again, fails her move silently roll. So they awake, battle ensues, and my son's character, actually, Katak, had a critical miss, as himself, the cleric, and the halfling had squared off individually on each one of these goblins, while the thief sat in the doorway, pelting him with arrows. And my son's critical miss, I rolled to make sure he didn't hurt himself, so he ended up burying his greatsword his longsword, into the bedpost of the bed this goblin had been sleeping in. And without even missing a beat, the kid says, "No problem, I'm going to spend a turn and draw my greatsword." He says, "Well, I'm going to let you have that. I'm going to have you draw your greatsword as your move action, and you can still swing on him, because you're right there in melee range." So he just dispatches this goblin. Meanwhile, the cleric is off fighting his. He keeps missing. He's having bad rolls. But then he's a cleric. He's not intended to be a melee fighter, but he's holding his own. And the halfling and the thief, Ismarta and Corelli, are squaring off on this third goblin. And I was really impressed, because Corelli eventually did put down her crossbow and bow and go in with dual daggers and successfully backstab this goblin, just taking it down. And then they all move on to fight the one that was fighting Dalrod, our cleric, and they dispatch it as well. So they decide to search this room, and they do find a desk that had been locked, and Corelli did successfully pick the lock, and inside they find a manifest with a bunch of names and a bunch of items that look like valuables, and they figure, well, maybe this is what had become of the caravan, so they decide to hang on to that for later use. So they go across the hall to this other doorway, and Corelli tries to do a pick locks because the door is locked, and then no one ever said, "I want to listen at the door, I want to see if I hear anything like that." So as soon as she fails her pick locks roll, I state that if you fail a pick locks roll, you've got a chance of either breaking the picks or breaking the lock. And so, well, she broke the lock. So then Ismarta, our halfling, says, "Well, I'm just going to break the door down." So she kicks in the door, goes charging in, and lo and behold, she's found 3 dire wolves. These were mounts for those 3 goblins. Well, due to her failed caution, I guess, I decided to punish her a little. And Ismarta is now tackled by these 3 dire wolves, and they all 3 of them successfully hit and take her down to very low health. The cleric spends his next turn healing him up. they do some. The battle ensued, and they do dispatch these 3 wolves and take them out. They're all pretty well beat up. These are probably the hardest of the enemies they've encountered so far. I think their hit die was 2 plus 2 hit points for each wolf. So they decided to rest. And they didn't just rest, though. They went back into the barracks room where the goblins had been sleeping, put the dresser, the goblins, the bodies of the wolves, and any bedding that they could find against this wall to bar any entry. I had no intention of rolling random encounters once we actually got into the dungeon crawl, but hey, they'd learned their error of their ways as far as caution had gone, so I let them have it. It was great. I was thrilled to see how excited they were about. They were really getting into their characters as far as feeling danger. So I thought that was really neat. And the next morning, 8 hours later, an 8-hour rest period, the cleric gets his spells back, and everyone heals 3 life. They decided to descend the stairs into the next level. And the next level is a bigger floor, where they enter and they find a long corridor with and an intersecting corridor in front of them, with a door on the left and a door on the right. The door on the left is locked. They leave it alone. And they sneak up to the door on the right, and they're really utilizing their thief here as a scout. I thought it was kind of neat. The thief sneaks in there and also attempts to hear noise, and overhears 2 goblins talking about having to cook for the rest of the tribe. And she was so successful. I think it was because she'd moved silently. She rolled a 1, and I was like, well, that's as successful as you can get. So she even made it so the joke was made that these 2 goblins were named Clinton and John. So I rolled with it. Heck, so Clinton's here and John's here, and she sneaks up on Clinton and backstabs him. Just decimates this poor goblin. And she even said that she wanted to kill him quietly. So she kills him, he dies, he's dead. Clinton still hasn't noticed. She makes another successful move silently roll and backstabs John, killing him as well. They were, I think I'd spooked them with the wolves, because then they went to so much caution as to actually move any food that these goblins had been cooking off the burners, as to not alert the rest of the tribe that the cooks were not in the kitchen anymore. So then they move on to the next room on that same hallway, and they enter the room and find that it had just been caved in. So they didn't find anything of value there, so they moved on. Now they swoop around the other side of the hallway down to the next set of intersecting doors, and find on the left a door that is locked, and they can't hear anything at it, and they can't pick it. So then my son's character, the fighter Katak, decides to take a crowbar that Ismarta had actually paid for back in Daggerfell, and pry the door open. And as well, I had to roll a saving throw against, I figured wands or breath. I think it was breath weapon or wands, because it wasn't necessarily a trap, but I figured it could be close enough. It wasn't exactly a dragon, but there's no save versus trap. So, well, he failed. Unfortunately, this next room had been caved in as well, but so much to the severity that the rocks had been piled up against the door. And as soon as he opened the door, I think I rolled 2d6 rocks, come through and pelt him and land on him, and effectively took him to 0, nearly killed him. The cleric burned another one of his spells to bring Katak back and heal him almost full. And so they move on to this next, the last room. It's this larger room. And as they're moving through there, as they're moving towards the door for this room, they hear footsteps. And obviously that cave-in, the rocks falling through the door didn't happen quietly. So 5 goblins come busting in through that door. And the cleric, Dolrot and Katak had actually headed back for the kitchen for some reason. So they were actually outside of melee range. They were at least 1 turn away as far as movement. So, no, they decided to make a run for it because they'd heard the footsteps. And Corelli and Ismarta had failed a dexterity check I had them make, since it was just a sudden run. And so they failed horribly too. I think it was Ismarta had a critical miss. So they trip over each other, and they're laying prone on the floor, surrounded by these 5 goblins. Meanwhile, Dolrot and Katak have decided, oh, well, shoot, we better go save our friends. So they turn and actually decide to come back. Dolrot spends one turn, moving back into the melee, while Katak simply drew a short bow and started firing arrows at them. So they gain their footing, and they do end up dispatching these 5 goblins as well. And they decide to go into the dining hall and search. Look around, see if there's anything of interest. And as they go into this long, rectangular-shaped dining hall, there's 3 tables against one wall, and at the other side there's a small fireplace with 4 chairs. And for some reason that just struck odd with this Martar halfling, so she decides to go over there and search. And as I always played it that if you were not, detecting traps per se, if you were just, I wanted to search for objects, I'd give you a 1 out of 6 chance. Roll a d6 for me. And the player pegged it. He rolled a 1. So he found I had pre-rolled a random magical item that had been hidden in those chairs. It was a ring of protection +3. And excellent group play form, as Marta decides to not keep it, but to pass it on to their thief, who had the highest armor class. Give her some extra protection. So they move on, and then they decided to strategize again, and it's becoming a bad habit of theirs. And I'd actually had planned for 2 more wolves to be in the next room, guarding the staircase down in the basement. And as they were taking too long, I'm making rolls, and I make it. The wolves hear them, but they're still talking. They don't even notice me rolling. So before they know it, we've got it drawn out on the map where everyone's standing. My son's character, Katak, was nearest the door with his back to it. So I tell him, before you know, and the next thing you know, Katak is just taken down by this wolf. This wolf jumps up and bites into his shoulder and takes him to the ground. So of course, panic, the wolves actually got a sneak attack on these guys, and did some pretty devastating damage to Katak. And the battle was still ended up being successful, and they decided they needed to rest again. And they didn't bar any doors or put any bodies against any doors this time, but I gave it to them. They rested, and they decided to move on to the next level. The next level of this dungeon, we'll just call it that, is just a large hall with these 4 columns in the middle lit with torches. They see dead bodies of what could be merchants, women, children. Man, it's terrible, strewn about this room, and a very large hearth fireplace defended by 2 bugbears. And as they're still on the staircase, they decide to try to take an attack. I even stated the bugbears were talking amongst themselves. They hadn't noticed them. Take a ranged attack on them, which was successful, and they effectively downed one of them before the fight had even begun. And then we rolled initiative and moved on. The halfling had charged into the battle to fight the bigger of the 2 bugbears, and even placed himself on the opposite side of the staircase, putting himself effectively between the bugbear and the fireplace, turning his back to the thief. I thought it was phenomenal. So the thief took that opportunity to attack with a backstab, rolling a 20. It was a critical hit. So 2d4. She's dual wielding daggers, rolling a 4 on each one. Double damage anyway. Double damage from the crit. This bugbear goes down as well. I had this fight planned out to be much longer. There was even going to be some dialogue, but they didn't even have a chance to get it out. They were dead. So here we are. We're sitting in what could have ended up being, these goblins' bosses, and I think it was the cleric had thought, well, we're done. Let's get out of here. And one of the other party members says, no, there's something more to this. That was just too easy. And they all search the room, and I give them again the 1 out of 6 chance. And I think it was multiple. I think more than one of them actually rolled a 1. So they do notice this faint breeze coming from behind the fireplace. And they decide to search, and they do end up finding the mechanism that opens a secret door. And as it opens, the fireplace douses itself and puts itself out. So they were able to safely traverse into the next room, where they come across a great gray worm. A big 6-hit die, nasty creature with the ability to swallow you on a successful 19 or 20 roll. I was really hoping we'd get to play that mechanic, but it didn't, unfortunately didn't come to pass. However, this is where the good dice rolls stopped. Unfortunately, the cleric couldn't hit this thing to save his life, and Katak, our fighter, had a critical miss with his greatsword. And I had it roll so that he actually ended up losing his greatsword down the gullet of this horrible monster. And thinking this would phase him even a little bit, he says, "Oh, no big deal at all," and he draws one of his short swords that he'd picked up off the bandits previous this week. So I was like, I'll be darned, he's not just going to sell them, he's actually got it in his head that these are still usable items. I was pretty thrilled to see his mind working that way. And so he goes to fight on with this, and then the next turn is Marta, our halfling, decides to attack, and he critically misses. And I said, well, why not? We'll just go with a rolling trend. And it says he swallows your scimitar as well, without missing a beat. Katak says, no problem, I've got another, and throws his other short sword to him. This is before we know it, my son is building himself to be the group's armory. It's just maybe very Zachnafine in nature, this great weapon master that's always got a hilt at the ready. And so he's passing out weapons. And they continue the fight and slowly whittle this monster down. And then they make a search check afterwards. And, well, really, it's not really a search check. They find underneath where the Grey Worm had been guarding a trap door in the floor. And I think they were expecting the dungeon to carry on quite a bit farther, because then they decide to completely rest until healed, gain their spells back. I believe the cleric even went into maybe researching another spell or two instead of just the Cure Light Wounds he'd been using. And they rest up again. They talk about this in great detail. And I'm done. This is the end of the dungeon. I was just going to give them their loot on the other side of this trapdoor. I guess I could have just put it there. And so they make this big suspenseful gearing up, drawing their weapons, and opening the trapdoor to find... Oh, well, that's just our treasure then, isn't it? And, so they'd successfully routed this foe and cleared out this problem of these goblins and bugbears had been obviously using this Grey Worm to attack the caravans and steal all the loot. So they decide to carry on to Haven. And once they get there, send a messenger back to Daggerfell that they had been successful. And the messenger returns with their reward, and they get all their items identified, and go on about their day. Well, now I'm running 2 groups. We've got a total of 10 different players, all in Haven now. So I think we've got what we're looking for as far as a good gaming community started here. And seeing as they're all in Haven, perhaps we now actually have the opportunity to maybe mix the groups in any way we see fit, or they see fit, depending on who's available on any given night. So maybe here in the future we will try to set up some sort of schedule when either myself or Jason, the other DM, if he's available, can set up random gaming nights and we can see who can come and game. Let's see good things coming in the future, guys. Have a good night.